show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Football Outsiders live stream for Thursday, January 6th, 2022. I'm Aaron Schatz, editor-in-chief of Football Outsiders, joined as always on Thursdays by Mike Tanier. We're also joined today by Vince Verhei and by Parker Fleming. We are going to preview for you both NFL Week 18 and the big Georgia-Alabama National Championship game. So the story of NFL Week 18, as we'll get to in a few minutes, is which of these ridiculous, absurd upsets might actually happen and how would that take place? So the best game of the weekend with all, I mean no disrespect to the Chargers and Raiders here, but the best game of the weekend is Georgia and Alabama. So we're going to start with Georgia and Alabama on Monday night for the national championship in another rematch, right? It's interesting. It's a rematch week in the NFL because it's all division games. So all these teams have played each other once before. You don't get a lot of rematches in college football, but this is one. And I believe Brian Fremo's stat this week said 56% of rematches in college football over the last 15 years have been won by the team that won the first game, which is actually a kind of surprisingly low number. Mm-hmm. Right. So Parker, tell us about Georgia and Alabama and what you think we should be expecting in this national championship game on Monday night.
Yeah, definitely interesting to see the rematch and a rematch of evenly matched teams. You know, that stat about 56%. You think about how often in rematches was one team obviously better than the other. We saw that with Utah and Oregon this year, where Utah just kind of beat down on Oregon. And then 2 weeks later, they rematched in the Pac-12 championship and the same exact thing happened. So really interesting with two great coaches in Kirby Smart and Nick Saban to kind of see what they'll be able to do with a couple of weeks of preparation, having played a game and what might be different. Obviously, the biggest thing here, I think, is there's some big injuries on Alabama's side of things, specifically the receiver John Mechie. He went down in the SEC championship game and Alabama's offense really stalled. He won't be playing for Alabama, so that kind of deep threat wide receiver, they'll have to figure out how to replace that. And then along the offensive line, there was 2 to 3 guys who have been banged up and that Alabama's had to replace. That was evident against Cincinnati, where some of Cincinnati in the later in the game, some of Cincinnati's defensive front was able to kind of pester Alabama. That this is really interesting because you try to get storylines out of what happened in the college football playoff. And I think both coaches in the college football playoff, Kirby Smart of Georgia and Nick Saban of Alabama, were trying to put as little on film as possible and still win. I mean, you look at Alabama was rushing on 43% of early downs all season, and they start the game running 16 out of 17 plays were designed runs and just said, hey, we're more physical. We don't have to do anything else against Cincinnati. We know the big question for this game is for the national championship, for our rematch with Georgia, is how do we fix our downfield passing problem with Mechie out. They weren't going to put that answer on film against Cincinnati if they didn't have to. Same thing with Georgia. You saw them running a couple trick plays, really focusing on what Kirby Smart has been talking about all season and all postseason of loosening up and just feeling relaxed and saying, we're confident that we're good and we're going to be able to play here. So a couple really interesting kind of competing storylines in the game. My model actually moved from 2 weeks ago, or two games ago, I guess, rather. It's been more than 2 weeks. I had this as a coin flip, slightly favoring Alabama. That's moved to 5 points in favor of Alabama here, even as the betting line has Georgia as the favorite.
It's really interesting because if you think about, we've got sort of 2 sets of stats at Football Outsiders. We've got the FEI drive-based stats, and we've got your play-by-play based stats. Your play-by-play based stats favor Bama. FEI favors Georgia by a couple of points. So they're sort of in contradiction to each other, which I think shows how close this game should be. Now, here's the thing. When they played in the SEC championship, it wasn't close. Right? What can be different this time? What happened in that game that should be different this time that should make this one much closer?
Yeah. So, of course, the injuries, I think, are the one thing that you can say this is the biggest deal for Alabama because Bryce Young passed for, 400 yards in that game, or 421 yards in that game. And so that's obviously going to be different. Alabama's running back Brian Robinson, who had a great game in the semifinal, was also dealing with a nagging hamstring injury. And so perhaps we'll see him run more than 16 times, which he did in that game. I think the biggest thing to point out, though, is that Georgia wasn't doing that poorly against Alabama. It's 31-17 in the third quarter, and Stetson Bennett throws an interception that Alabama returns for a touchdown to make it 38-17, completely blows the game open. But the very next drive, Georgia goes 7 plays, 75 yards, and scores a touchdown. If they had just tackled Jordan Battle returning the ball, or if Bennett hadn't thrown that interception, maybe you're looking at 31-24 in the fourth quarter. That's a lot closer than the score seems. And of course, with football, it's dynamic. You can change, you could do that for any game and make a 56-0 blowout look closer than it was. But I think that's important to look at in terms of what's informative kind of going forward. The biggest key for me and what might be different is if Georgia can avoid a situation where Alabama gets up by more than one score, and Stetson Bennett doesn't have to press. Stetson Bennett is not going to be like an NFL MVP quarterback. He might go down as a very good college quarterback, and Georgia doesn't need much more than that. But when you get in this negative game script against a very talented, very experienced Alabama, who's very good at showing you dynamic pressures, Nick Saban talked about that this week, that's where Georgia's really going to struggle, is if they have to rely on Stetson Bennett in the passing game to bring them back from a lead.
Right, because he's not a star. I mean, Young is a star. Young is like, we're all going to be talking about him in the draft next year as a top prospect. Bennett may not even play in the NFL.
Yeah, given this quarterback class, you might be talking about Bryce Young just in terms of who has to draft in 2022. You might be talking about Bryce Young at the 2022 draft too, just comparing him to guys from this year.
We are going to, because this year's quarterback class is terrible compared to the 2023 class. The 2023 class has all kinds of guys in it like Young. And they've got, I mean, it's Alabama, so they recruit so well. There must be star receivers other than Mechie. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, and the big deal there. So obviously, I mean, they have 4 and 5 stars all the way down. JoJo Earl was really talented, had a good run had a good reception in the championship game. And if you look at the box score from the Georgia Alabama round 1 game, Jamison Williams actually led the team. He had, 7 receptions, 184 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's largely because Georgia was able to lock down on John Mechie, and he was kind of the counterpunch. And so it's not necessarily that they don't have, a stable of talented guys. Slade Bolden, who feels like he's been at Alabama for 5 or 6 years now, is a good possession receiver for them. But the issue for Alabama is, can one of these younger guys step into a role where when Georgia and their excellent defense clamps down on Jamison Williams, can somebody develop a counterpunch there in the passing game? And so I'm interested to see kind of schematically how they do that, because against Cincinnati, they really didn't pass in a way that would indicate how they're going to approach that. But one name to look at in terms of matchups and guys who haven't been very loud for Alabama this year, Cameron Latu at tight end for Alabama presents a really interesting matchup in the middle for Georgia. That's somebody they haven't used. And if you guys remember a couple years ago, O.J. Howard almost kind of out of nowhere just had an amazing championship game because Alabama was like, hey, we have an awesome tight end. We haven't had to use him, but it works out pretty well here, so we're going to use him. Maybe you could see something interesting there from Cameron in the passing game, just because Alabama is going to have to find a way to get creative if Georgia can lock down Jamison Williams.
Is Latu one of those guys like Howard where he's blocking all the time and we haven't seen the receiving side of his game? Is that the kind of game he has?
Yeah, so he's, 6'5", 250, has, basically just a fast tackle. But he only has 300 passing or receiving yards all season, hasn't really been used. And you think about with Alabama having issues along the offensive line earlier in the season, and then again as guys got hurt later on, that tight end in college football, a lot of times you've got to keep him in or keep an extra running back in for protection to get those 6 and 7 man protections, whereas rather you send him out for a pass or something. So all sorts of reasons that he could be more involved as a complement if JoJo Earl or Ja'Cory Brooks can't step up to be that second option for Alabama and Bryce Young.
Is the Georgia defense more based around stud players, or is it more of a schematic thing?
It's kind of like you think about if you're proving something in mathematics, you often talk about like a necessary and a sufficient condition. The talent that they have is a necessary condition for an excellent defense. They, but I think they also need the scheme as well, and Kirby Smart and what he knows. And so I don't think it's necessarily either one. Do I think that Kirby Smart could take a G5 defense and put together a really, really good unit? Yes. Do I think that, guys like Nakobe Dean are absolute freaks who have great mental processing on the field, as we saw, against Michigan? Everyone's seen that highlight where he calls out the orbit motion and then makes the tackle all the way across the field. Just absolutely crazy. I think it's a little bit of both, which is what, Kirby Smart wants to do. And that's how he wants to win national championships, to say, I can go get the best talent and then I can put them in the best position to use that talent to succeed. So it's not like Kirby Smart does anything necessarily novel on defense that we haven't seen. It's not like when the 3-down tight front a couple years ago was all the rage and it was confusing people. It is, hey, we know what we're doing, we know our rules, and we're going to execute. And that is a function of talent and a function of scheme.
So in your gut, right, the numbers, right, Brian's numbers have it one way, your numbers have it the other way. If you had to pick the game, do you like Alabama to win again, or do you like Georgia to rebound and to get the rematch? Yeah,
it's so hard to bet against Nick Saban. It's just so hard to bet against Nick Saban. You just won't be making money if you do that very often. It is interesting to me. I do think that Georgia had a little bit more of a physical game against Michigan, even as they kind of blew them out more than Alabama blew out Cincinnati. In my heart of hearts, I think I'm trusting Nick Saban here. I think that he will win again. Just because I do think that they have enough on defense to really mess with Stetson Bennett. And I don't know if he can kind of get over that hurdle of that mental block of, hey, we're playing against Alabama. I've had bad games against Alabama. I mean, in that first game, Alabama probably dropped two more interceptions on top of the 2 that they had as well. So I would lean towards Alabama winning this one again. It wouldn't shock me. I think that the outcomes I can see are a close Georgia win or an Alabama blowout. Those are kind of my 2 strongest, most likely outcomes. But I do think that I would lean towards Alabama and Nick Saban here.
We got 3 points in Alabama. That's even better.
Yeah, that's crazy. And there was some a little bit of reverse line movement there yesterday, which is just kind of odd. But I don't know what people are gonna bet on. I would expect people to bet on Georgia. Just like if you told me that there was a coin flip and it was 60-40 odds and I flipped it and it came up on the 40 side, if I flipped it again, you'd still pick the 60 side. So I think a lot of people are going to bet Georgia just for that reason. But I think until one of Nick Saban's assistants can beat him in a big spot, I don't know that anyone can. So
Useful was first asked, has Alabama under Saban ever lost a game when Bama was an underdog going into the game? Has Bama ever been an underdog going into the game?
Yes, I think. Okay, so I looked this up earlier this week because I had the same question. That's a great question. I think I looked this up earlier this week, and I think that it's Alabama's been an underdog 6 times, and they're 5-1 when they're underdogs.
Wow.
Every part also of that just won so many games. Yeah, it's just really hard to. That's going back to that's going back to Nick Saban in 2008. Shout out, I think Gary Seegers or Kyle Hunter, my co-host on BetUS, pulled that stat. I think that's why it's in my head. But that's going to 2008. It's hard to make any kind of meaning. It's a fun trivia, but it's hard to make any kind of meaningful inference on that, just because it's so rare that it happens that they are the underdog. So very, very interesting.
Right. I get the inference that you can make on it is, it's not a ridiculous possibility to suggest that Nick Saban wins as an underdog, because it's happened 5 out of 6 times.
Yeah.
Right. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. But it's there's a good chance.
He wins as an underdog. He wins as a favorite. He wins as a pick'em. There's a pattern here.
He wins when he's angry with what the media is saying about him. He wins when he's happy what they're saying, angry what they're saying, kind of all sorts of ways.
I saw somebody tweet about this, but there's been a lot of discussion about college football and how do we get away from this with Alabama? How do we get away from the same teams every year? How do we get away from Alabama? Even if Alabama wins another championship, it's exhausting. How do we get away from this every year? And someone pointed out it's sort of in the history of college football that, Pete Carroll had all the best talent, was winning championships or going to the championship every year. And before that, it was Bobby Bowden at Florida State. And this was what happens when a really good coach could gather all the best talent without any, in the NFL, there's all these forces that take talent away from you to try to create parity. There's no forces like that in college football other than players wanting playing time and going into the transfer portal. Right. So the best coaches can collect the best talent, which means you're going to get the same teams year after year after year. And the only way to legislate against it is to somehow prevent the best coaches from getting the best talent.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple interesting potential solutions there. One of them is Nick Saban retires, because that frees up an entire playoff spot and maybe makes it that the SEC doesn't automatically have 2 playoff spots there. But I will point out, there are 2 new teams in the playoff this year that have never been before, just 2 entirely new faces. And that in itself is intriguing. Of course, with Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, you're worried about, does this just become an SEC championship round 2 with so much talent accumulated there? But I will say I'm a little reluctant for any kind of big sweeping change to the sport before Nick Saban retires, because our view of parity is just skewed by the best college football program builder and maintainer in the history of the game. And so that to me is interesting. I do think that there's some funkier proposals on the table that some folks have talked about, like dynamic scholarships. And so if you go 4-8, you can sign, 30 guys instead of 25 guys. Oh. And if you go 14-0, you can only sign 20 instead of 25 and move it around. Of course, there's monetary limits and some schools can't afford that. So we've got to figure that out. But some of those are interesting just because there are ways to potentially reward teams who are rebuilding and not punish teams who are excellent, but say, hey, we're going to give other people an opportunity to get involved. I don't know if I love those. Again, Saban's got to retire before I'm too worried about parity in college football, because it's just been Alabama and then a couple of good teams hovering around them. It's not like there's, a huge gulf between like 7 teams and then the rest of college football. It's like Alabama and then whoever's, second and third, and then a huge gulp all the way back to like number 30. Those are kind of the same. So
I am picturing the booster club getting the coach aside saying, you got a tank this year, and so we get 60 scholarships next year. I am picturing that, and I am at the thought of that dynamic scholarships.
But Aaron made the point that this is the way college football, and that this particular Alabama run is longer than a lot, but there's always a dominant program. And before it was Pete Carroll's USC. Before that, it was the University of Miami was the best every year. Before that, in the 80s, you go like Tom Osborne in Nebraska, or Barry Switzer at Oklahoma, and going back to Army in the 1940s. There's always one team that dominates college football, and every decade or so that team changes, and eventually it won't be Alabama's turn.
Right.
Yeah, and I think something like Lincoln Riley going west is good for the sport to kind of spread it out of this southeastern. Obviously the circumstances, and it's kind of weird when coaches leave in the middle of the night and all that. But it's saying USC being good again should change the national perception and landscape to make it a little bit more.
It's weird for the best athletes from California and Hawaii to be going to Alabama.
Yeah, that's so odd. And it's not like that shouldn't happen. And it's good that they have more opportunities, right, to kind of choose. And I think there's a lot of unobserved benefit for some lower level players who, might not have got a scholarship offer to UCLA, but get a scholarship offer to Toledo and go play football for 4 years. And that's cool. But yes, I do think that regional recruiting national recruiting is definitely one of the drivers of kind of this consolidation of talent. It's not like that should be outlawed. It's not like that's bad, but again, powers on both coasts and in the Midwest kind of leveling that out should help with some of these parity concerns.
Yeah. All right, man. Huge game. I'll be watching Georgia and Alabama. I don't watch that much college football, but I'll be watching this because there's going to be it could be nice, hopefully tight, hopefully not a blowout. And a lot of guys will be playing on Sundays next year. So Parker Fleming writes the 1 Foot in Bounds column for us on Mondays, reviewing college football at Stats of War. Thank you, Parker. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, guys. Appreciated it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, now it's time to talk about the NFL Week 18. But before we do, I want to give Mike Tanier a small amount of time to talk about how happy he is that there will be no more Wonderlic.
Oh, thank you. Yes. I am the NFL media's ranking expert in standardized testing from my many years in high school and working in the standardized testing industry, sometimes concurrently, sometimes in place of being a teacher. The Wonderlic was a 1960s and 1970s MBA type. Let's try to take an executive, a young person applying for an executive job, and give them like a quick mental acuity test to see if they have what it takes to run the accounting department. Okay. In the 70s, we did not check for various types of biases, race, gender, etc. We just gave tests like this to a bunch of 20-something-year-old white guys and said, how good are they at doing like number recognition patterns and spot the logic error patterns and things like this. And they created this thing called the Wonderlic test. NFL grabbed it and said, ooh, let's give players this. Probably at the time it made sense. It's like, oh, we have a sort of an IQ test type of thing that we can give quickly, that can be tested quickly. We sign this contract, etc. The rest of the world realized that kind of test was not valid. We stopped giving any tests like that to young people moving up. I mean, we give standardized tests now. They have their own problems, separate rant, but they are tested and normed against a variety of things to try to minimize the amount of biases that are built into these tests. Wonderlic just kind of rolled on as a product. There was no educational money, no public money going into it. It just rolled on, and has been used for decades as a number one thing, as a shaming hammer towards young players, particularly quarterbacks, very often quarterbacks of color, who did poorly on this test that has a very mathematical, analytical, and verbal component to it that has no reasonable bearing on their abilities in the NFL. And I have talked to scouts and former scouts who said, well, you know what? We've used that test and we've red flagged a couple of guys who it turned out weren't going to be able to handle it. They didn't have the mental skills to do it. And I would say, you could probably ask him to multiply a couple of numbers or name some state capitals or something like that. You would probably be getting the same red flag that this guy legitimately didn't have it upstairs. Instead, you were giving them something that had this veer of scientificness that would then get stuck on Pro Football Talk. And we would then be spending weeks talking about Vince Young. Does he have it all upstairs? And it was frankly racist. It was anti-scientific. It was anti-intellectual, analytic, with the veneer of being scientific and analytical. It is gone. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Thank you, everyone, for
very good.
I knew that I didn't have to prepare you. Like, I knew you were ready to go. Like, as soon as I said it, like you've done the Wonderlic spiel so many times over the last 20 years. Like, yes. I figured you were ready to go. If you're watching us right now on Twitch or on YouTube, please feel free to make comments and questions about Week 18 games in the comments. Let's talk about Week 18. So like I said earlier, the theme of Week 18 is basically which of these crazy upsets might happen and why. Because unfortunately, we ended up with not a lot of games between two teams in playoff contention that are actually playing each other. I did put a poll up on Twitter before this with 4 of the biggest possibilities, the biggest lines, and the most common upset people chose. I put up to people choose between Denver, Kansas City, Bills and Jets, Texans and Titans, and Jags and Colts. And the one that got the most votes was Texans and Titans.
Yep.
So we'll get to that in a little bit. The one I think that got the fewest votes was Kansas City and Denver. So we'll start with that because that's on Saturday. So we're not doing our fun little graphics about making the playoffs because we all know how this works, right? Kansas City is basically playing to hope that hope that Tennessee loses to Houston. So they have a reason to go out there and play hard. But, I mean, what does a Broncos upset look like in this game?
Teddy Bridgewater's out, I believe, again.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's Drew Lock.
So I believe this is a Drew Lock goes ham with weird Carson Wentz YOLO stuff down the field that catches the Chiefs off guard, and then you get a turnover or two by the Chiefs, and the game snowballs in that direction. and that's what it looks like. The likelihood on that seems like it's like 10%.
It really feels like you need the Kansas City to have the turnovers that bounce off dudes' hands again.
Yeah, I mean, I get what Mike is saying, but at the same time, when we ask the question, what does a Denver upset look like? I can easily see a defense that just got roasted by Jamar Chase, giving up a handful of big plays to a Mad Bomber quarterback and Drew Lock with a deep receiving core. And I can see Kansas City's offense reverting to September form, where they're doing super cutesy goal line stuff and getting bad bounces of the football. And every game we talk about what an upset, we're going to talk about turnovers. That's going to be part of it. But do I think it's going to happen? No, of course it would be a huge upset. But if that upset happens, I can easily picture what it would be like.
I would think Denver would want to run a lot. Drew Lock has Mike Semperviv points out Drew Lock also has a wonky shoulder, so you may be getting some Brett Rippon in this game.
Ooh, exciting!
I'm going with Denver 5-day forecast. Let me see if that tells me anything. Maybe a foot of snow. Saturday high of 44 with precipitation. So slop game, that could be a factor where it turns into a slop game, and then you slow down the Chiefs and they still try to do all their goofy stuff, and they do it in sleet. There's a possibility.
CCX3 points out Denver's run game has been horrible the last couple of weeks, which is true, and Kansas City's run defense is up to 19th in DVOA, so it's been much better over the last few weeks.
Yeah. I don't think Locke and Shermer. I don't think Fangio and Shermer like Locke very much. And they kind of put this random. No one does, but I mean, they're the coaches, and they're like sort of actively like so suspicious of Locke and nervous of Locke. They put these horrible game plans together.
I feel like the way the Denver story that involves an upset probably involves Brett Rippon coming in and being much better than anybody expects, and them just being like, "Go ahead, throw the ball deep. Go ahead, go on."
Well, there you go. I think we've made our point here. What's the spread? 9 points, CCX?
The spread is 10. The current spread is 10.
Uh-huh.
Would you take Kansas City minus 10, or would you take Denver plus 10?
I'll backdoor cover that. I got 10.5 showing now. And with that weather report, which might compress the game a little bit, especially if it's a windy sleet type of game, I'll take the backdoor cover in the Broncos.
Yeah, I don't gamble much, but 10 points is a lot. Strange things happen in the NFL. I know it's a Saturday game, so they're going to have motivation no matter what. But it's also week 18. Strange things happen. I would take the points in that one and pour myself a drink.
So much of betting in week 18 seems to be connected to the motivation.
Yeah.
I talk about this, like normally there's one or two games where our projected line is different from the actual line by 3 points or more.
Right.
This week there were 6. Then the Detroit Green Bay line moved a little bit. So now there's 5, but that's still way more than usual because I'm not mathematically incorporating motivation.
That would be hard to do.
Go with Kansas City, though. Speaking of motivation, I feel like Kansas City is motivated to not take their foot off the gas.
Right.
They want, it matters if the Texans can beat Tennessee. The Kansas City wants the number 1 seed. I feel like Denver with backup quarterbacks. I feel like Kansas City can cover.
Okay.
What about head coach motivation? Says Grouchish for those on the hot seat.
Fangio's been a hot seat for weeks. He wasn't able to beat the Raiders, So
yeah, I don't know how head coach motivation improves I guess by getting more aggressive. Fangio's been surprisingly aggressive this year after he was already, so conservative last year. I did not know this, but Let's Go Royals points out that Drew Lock grew up in Kansas City.
Ooh. There you go. It's a factor.
So it's a home team factor.
You can't dispute that.
How dare you not draft me, my hometown team?
We're not going to discuss is Dallas at Philadelphia, because in the leverage of how much this matters, those little graphics we put up every Thursday for Super Bowl odds, neither Dallas nor Philadelphia sees their Super Bowl odds move more than 0.2% if they win this game,
right,
or lose this game. So the seeding barely matters. The seeding changes barely matter. So this game doesn't matter.
And the Eagles have 6 million starters on COVID, and
And so does
Sirianni's
Dallas. Dallas has Micah Parsons on COVID.
yeah. And Sirianni's like mentality has been like, let's keep guys healthy. So he's not going to go plowing into this game with a bunch of COVID guys coming off the last second.
Yeah. Pittsburgh. The problem is I don't know if Dallas is going plowing into this game either.
Right. Right.
Pittsburgh at Baltimore, 1 p.m. Sunday. So both of these teams have a tiny itty bitty chance of making the playoffs if they win this game. They would need the Jags to lose. They would need the Jags to beat the Colts, and then each team needs other things to happen for the winner of this game to make the playoffs. But it is possible. So this game does matter for both teams. Previous game was the one where Pittsburgh beat Baltimore 20-19. That was the first one where Baltimore went for 2 on the goal line, and TJ Watt slapped the ball away that was going to get to Mark Andrews, that was going to score the 2-point conversion. Deontay Johnson went on the COVID list, which is good for my one fantasy team that's playing in Week 18 and has Chase Claypool. So yay.
Nice. Lamar Jackson did not practice with his ankle yesterday. Huntley is a full participant. So we're probably seeing Huntley again. Huntley has played well enough to lose these games with all the other things going on.
Yeah. I mean, their defense. Huntley has played as well as Jackson played. Right. It's just that their defense sucks against the pass. They're 6th against the run and 30th against the pass.
Right. Yeah. I think the Ravens may have 3 quarterbacks better than Pittsburgh starter right now. Josh Johnson came in out of nowhere and looked reasonable. and Ben was so bad on Monday night. The game plan.
Yes.
I don't know if it's Ben or the game plan, but there's only so many 3-yard outs I can take. So but I just feel like Pittsburgh has been toying with us and we. I don't know if wasting our time is the right way to put it, but they're not going to win a playoff game. They may beat this Baltimore team because this Baltimore team is not very good, and who knows? Maybe they get the help they need and they get there. But they're just, why? What's the point? So this 7th wildcard team, the 7th playoff team per conference, I don't think has improved the slate of Week 18 games or last week games.
That's exactly why is this game. That's the thing I look at. Like what is the why here? And why here is because the Steelers excel at winning the way they did on Monday night. Look, we got a bunch of sacks and 50-yard field goals. Now we got a victory. And the Ravens were a contender, and they've been like huffing the fumes all the way down to the end here. But I can't get a beat on this game because I can't. It's like trying to like prognosticate a Falcons-Bears game at this point in terms of like, I mean, these teams are better than that, but it's almost like, oh, who's playing kind of okay? Who's still healthy? And
the problem is the Ravens just have like no defense.
They have nobody.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is a problem.
Yeah.
And it's weird.
The pass rush has been pretty average. The Steelers have a bad offensive line, but the Ravens' pass rush has not been great. And if they blitz guys, their cornerbacks cannot cover a one-on-one.
But you talk to someone who was a casual NFL fan, and maybe they watch an NFC team. They don't see Baltimore more than once every 2 or 3 years, and you tell them the Ravens have a terrible defense, and like their synapses misfire. Yeah. It doesn't process right. But it's true. The 2021 Baltimore defense is lousy.
Right.
So here's what is remarkable to me about this game. Baltimore is now favored by 6.
Maybe we're talking the motivation. Maybe people saw that Pittsburgh farewell to Ben, and they figure Ben has already retired.
No, I'm taking the Steelers in this situation.
I would take the Steelers plus the points. Yeah,
that's almost that's a lot. That's a big spread,
right? Yeah. Unless Vegas knows some injury or health thing. They heard Ben coughing or something. I don't know.
It would be different if the Steelers had no chance of making the playoffs. But the fact is that the winner of this game has a small chance of making it if other things happen. So they're going to both be trying.
Right. Right.
Mike Simpertive says it's the same with Seattle. It's a mind bender after so many years of that kind of defense.
Right.
Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Seattle, all have below average defenses this year.
Right. Yeah. And you can see Baltimore was so injury, and Seattle was injury situation to a degree here.
Sort of, yeah. But Seattle's has been more of a general decline, a gradual decline, and I feel like Baltimore just kind of came out of nowhere.
Everybody's just going to hurt.
Yeah.
Indianapolis at Jacksonville. What does a Jaguars upset look like? And the previous game this year, Jacksonville only lost by 6 points, 23-17, in one of those games where both teams ended up with negative DVOA.
We know what a Jacksonville upset looks like. It looks like Carson Wentz with the yakety sax music playing in the background. That's what it looks like. If he can successfully hand off to Jonathan Taylor and stay out of victory's way, they win. But if he goes on one of his spectacular little sprees, this turns into a game. I think they need more than that, frankly. I think the way the Jaguars played last week, they need more than just Carson.
They need a running game. In the first game between these teams, Robinson had 12 carries for 57 yards and a touchdown, and Jamal Agnew had a 66-yard touchdown run. But I would not expect to see that from Jamal Agnew again, and now there is no James Robinson. So
they're both gone, I think they are both gone.
Oh, is Agnew gone too?
I think Agnew was unless he came back, he was gone for several weeks. He had a pretty significant injury. I've lost track of the Jaguars, folks. I'm sorry. But if there was an interim, like if I thought Bevel or Schottenheimer or one of these guys was going to pull out all of the trick plays and like put them on display, like, oh, they could surprise the Colts. That's not who these assistants are. They don't. Schottenheimer's trick play would be like a 3-yard cross, and you know, a shallow cross. That's not how these guys operate. So you know, I can't see it. All I can see is Tom Fartery from Carson Wentz.
There's also Trevor Lawrence was the unquestioned #1 draft pick in a deep quarterback class 10 months ago, or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. And he obviously has not played like that. And I think that we all agree that's mostly because he was playing with the worst head coach we have ever seen.
Right.
So none of us are holding this year against him going forward, but he still has that talent, and maybe he just turns into Superman for one Sunday at the end of the year.
And Tavon Austin turns into the Flash, and Laquan Treadwell turns into Batman, and because he's O'Shaughnessy.
Right, it's like, look at who he's throwing to. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Point taken. I keep forgetting Tavon Austin is their top, and like Laquan Treadwell's their WR1.
I guess the UFL.
Chenault might be their first receiver, I guess.
I'm not going to get into this argument. I have more important things to do. the point stands.
15.5. Colts by 15.5.
I just said, you know, anytime the spread hits double digits, my inkling is always go with the underdog, then take the points. And this Colts team is way better than Jacksonville, but the way they play is not conducive to blowouts. So I would not bet this game, but if I was, I would take the points.
Yeah, I would probably take the points. And at this point with some of these, and I was looking at it, but I never really got done, like putting together some crazy parlay and like trying to get like 20 points on a couple of these games is almost like a better show. Like I take like the Jaguars plus 22 and then try to get some points like with you know, the Jets or something to make it work.
All right. Useful is first says you sound like Urban Meyer in November, Mike.
No longer paying attention to the Jaguars. Yes.
I'm going to kick you. There you go. Urban Meyer.
Houston at Tennessee. Sorry, Tennessee at Houston. Houston is the home team. We've actually seen what a Texans upset looked like because these teams played in week 11 and Houston won.
Yes.
22-13. Now, there was no Julio Jones in that game and there was no Derrick Henry. A.J. Brown did play, but he left twice with injuries. Tyrod Taylor was the Houston quarterback then. The Texans had a positive pass DVOA despite having only 107 passing yards. They took a 19-0 lead, and Tannehill threw 4 picks. Mm-hmm. So that's what it looks like.
Yep.
A.J. Brown gets hurt, and Tannehill throws 4 picks.
Also, Adrian Peterson was the running back in that game. Just there
was that the game.
A Hall of Famer was running around out there too. You know,
I've forgotten that. Yeah. So, Houston's defense is not terrible. It is merely bad. Mm-hmm. Houston's defense has more interceptions than Tennessee's defense does this year. And Ryan Tannehill is a guy who will throw 4 picks against bad teams once in a while. And you know, Aaron mentioned his Twitter poll. This is of the 4 upsets, this is the one people thought was most likely to happen, and I would agree with that. And we all agree that this Tennessee team is not as good as their record. Right. They keep winning every close game, which I think is a testament to Mike Vrabel. Yes. I think that's a Coach of the Year nominee right there. Getting the most out of the talent available is what a coach is supposed to do, and he's done a remarkable job of that. So yeah, this game is going to be on one of my screens on Sunday for sure.
I mean, I think the other thing is Davis Mills has played better in his second run as the quarterback. Mm-hmm. Davis Mills has been the second best of the rookie quarterbacks. That doesn't mean he's the second best of the rookie quarterbacks going forward. That doesn't mean he's more talented than Trevor Lawrence, whatever. But let's be honest, right? Yeah. He didn't have that much more to work with than what Trevor Lawrence had to work with.
Right.
Basically, he's in the same situation as Trevor Lawrence, except he's got Brandon Cooks.
Right.
And he has played reasonably over the last 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
not just avoiding mistakes. He's throwing downfield and getting big plays.
He throws,
His protection has been better than I thought it would be. That's been part of it. And the system there is pretty well. It's not like this Looney Tunes system, which I think Trevor Lawrence has part of the problem of. So he has been well within that structure there.
Houston is also interestingly very strong against wide receiver ones, but weak against wide receiver twos. So it would definitely be better for Tennessee if both Brown and Jones can play in this game rather than just Brown.
Especially since they don't have a wide receiver 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And
you're not a Nick Westbrook-Akine is not doing it for you.
He was one of the reasons for the 4 interceptions, if I recall, during that game. But we've seen what a Texans upset looks like, and I could see a close Texans game. I can't imagine the Titans coughing this one up under these circumstances.
I'm with you. I think it's really unlikely. Right. I think the Titans are better than what our numbers say when they're healthy.
Right.
And they are healthier now than they were before. I still think that, they may end up as the worst team in the playoffs in the AFC, even healthy, but they're not as bad as the numbers think they are. And they're nowhere near as bad as the Texans. The Texans offense is even with Mills playing better, their running game is non-existent. And there aren't a lot of great receivers other than Brandon Cooks.
They got one good game out of Rex Burkhead.
Yeah, they got one good game.
And that was the great Davis Mills game, which is why you have to be a little bit like what was going on. What was going on is the Chargers had a COVID outbreak. So, I don't want to negate what Davis Mills did there because it was very impressive. But there's a grain of salt. There's an asterisk with a lot of this.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Welcome to the 2020 and 2021 seasons where a lot of things have asterisks.
That honestly is true. People have been just casually asking me what I expect in the playoffs, and my answer is I have no idea. It every week changes.
It's a pretty up in the air year.
Yeah.
The line is 10. Tennessee by 10.
Yeah.
I would go Houston in the points.
It's another one would be so fun with a tease.
Yeah.
Houston plus 16 or something.
Yeah, if I could take Houston up to 16 and then I go back and take the Jaguars, I'm going to go explore that. But if I have to make a straight up pick now, okay, I will take the Texans and the points.
I feel like I'm repeating myself or pull my string and I say the same thing. But yes, I'm going to take a spread that big. And I've, again, of the upsets, if I was going to pick it upset straight up, this is the one I would pick.
Of the AFC big lines of the upsets, because the next game we're going to discuss is also is another one where we're looking for an upset, but I think it's a more likely upset, and that is New Orleans at Atlanta.
Yes.
4 p.m. New Orleans at Atlanta. I mean, this is another one where only New Orleans matters right now. So the question once again is, what does an Atlanta upset look like? But again, we've seen it in Week 9, which was Trevor Simeon's first start. Matt Ryan had 343 passing yards. That's the game where they threw to Patterson and he went 64 yards at the end of the game to set up the game-winning field goal.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible luck for the Saints. This is one huge play. And the Falcons, I think what a Falcons upset looks like is pass, because their running game sucks this year. And the Saints have the number one run defense. But the Saints are surprisingly low in pass rush win rate at ESPN. Like, despite what they did against Tampa, they're only 26th on the year.
Yeah.
So the Falcons, like Matt Ryan, should have time to throw.
Couple of things. Taysom Hill, I believe, is getting the start.
Yes, not Simeon this time.
Hill has 3 starts. The Saints have won all 3 games against the Falcons with Hill starting. Hill has a 75% completion rate against the Falcons. He averages 8.1 yards per pass against the Falcons. He averaged 7.0 yards per rush against the Falcons. Hill's one skill in this world, besides making Sean Payton love him with all his heart and soul, is beating the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, that's fair. There was a point around Halloween, maybe a little later, when I was looking at the NFC standings, and I think I said multiple horrible teams are going to make the playoffs in the NFC, and New Orleans is not horrible. They have gotten just enough offense, and their defense has been good most of the year that I'm withdrawing
it
them.
turns out that's not the case. Philadelphia has improved. I don't think they're a good team at this point. San Francisco is a good team at this point.
Of those three, I think San
Francisco is a stronger and would be more fun to watch in the playoffs than New Orleans.
Yes, and a higher floor, and we've seen them win a couple of playoff games not that long ago.
Yeah.
Yes, they're of those 3 NFC wildcard contenders. I think they're the one least likely to make the playoffs, or the most dangerous one if they do get in. But anyway, New Orleans is better than Atlanta. Mike brings up Taysom Hill's performance against the Falcons in the past, and the Falcons have a long history of falconing and getting beat by guys that other teams don't get beat by.
Mm-hmm.
And I can kind of see this turning into a quasi shootout where there's a mix of 3 and outs and explosive plays. Alvin Kamara could run wild, although he's not done a lot of that this year.
Well, everyone's stacked up against the run,
When the other team is playing like you're playing the option, it's hard to run. So what is the spread on this one?
4.5.
Yes, that sounds about right. I think New Orleans has impressed me enough. This is one where I would take the favorite, and figure they win by a touchdown. It may be a last play touchdown, but I think they can take this. They can take this. They have a lot more to play for than Atlanta does, obviously. Atlanta's whole motivation is let's get Kyle Pitts the tight end yardage record, and then we can go play golf.
That's what I'm looking at. 59 yards away, Kyle Pitts, from breaking Mike Ditka's record for rookie tight ends. I'm looking for props on this. They have not posted yet. I want to see a Kyle. Yeah, I mean, they might be waiting. They're going to put him out that morning or whatever, because I'm not that invested with the outcome of this game. In my brain, the Saints, the way they are now, are like every one of those terrible Bears teams that always makes the playoffs with no quarterback.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's if they make it, that's who they are. They're like the fake Bears at this point. But if I get a chance to watch this game and watch Pitts, and then, it's late in the game, we're just going to throw screens to Pitts and see if he can get 59 yards. I want to be on the business end and get him on a prop on that. So I have something fun to root for.
I would definitely go with Saints minus 4.5 on this one. That's the line, and that's
the Saints are good. The Falcons are bad.
Saints have
Saints are average,
and the Falcons don't.
Yeah,
except the tight end record.
The other game that matters for the 49ers, right? We know the situation is either the Saints need to lose or the 49ers need to win, and that puts the 49ers in the playoffs. So we talked about the math on this yesterday. Both of those things are less than 50% likely to occur, but it's more than 50% likely that one of those two things occurs.
Yes.
So let's talk about San Francisco at the LA Rams. This is the big game of the week. This is the best game of the week, even though the next one we'll discuss is the win and in game. This is the best because the 49ers are 7th in DVOA. The Rams are 5th in DVOA. Cooper Kupp is on pace for the all-time record in receiving DYAR.
Okay.
He needs a really big game to break the all-time record in receiving yardage.
Yep. He's
The
within
previous
range
game,
of 2,000 if he really blows up.
if he really blows up. The previous game was San Francisco 31, Rams 10 in week 10. And I think it's like San Francisco's won like 5 straight against the Rams or something. Like there's a whole does Shanahan have McVay's number discussion?
Mm-hmm.
And I will point out the 49ers, they are 2nd in defense against running. They are third in defense against short passes,
Mm.
and they are 32nd against deep passes.
Oh, that sounds bad.
On the other hand, the Rams are 27th against passes up the middle, and they're much better on deep passes than short passes. Right. Only Jacksonville is worse against short middle passes. And what do the 49ers, especially if Garoppolo is playing quarterback, what do the 49ers excel in? Short middle passes.
What do they only do?
Right.
Yeah.
Garoppolo was very limited. By the way, Garoppolo was very limited in practice Wednesday. We may be seeing Lance again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe I don't know if I can use profanity on this show, but Jimmy's when they asked him about what it was like playing with his hand, he said, "F, it hurts." Sounds like a bad diagnosis. But yeah, Brian Knowles has talked about how this is the NFC West rock, scissors, paper game where the Rams always beat the Seahawks always beat the 49ers, 49ers always beat the Rams, and the Cardinals just kind of do whatever they do up and down in a given year. But the 49ers have been playing very well lately. The Rams have been playing well at 22 positions, or sorry, 21 positions. But 21 positions. But the 22nd is the quarterback who has just been drunk out there for the past 2 weeks, and it's weird.
Yeah.
Because I was skeptical that the trade would work out when they made it. I was very blown away by Matthew Stafford up to like Halloween, like the slam dunk MVP, and then he kind of tailed off, was still playing very well. And these past 2 weeks, he's had more bonehead interceptions than he may have had in any year in Detroit. Right. He's just he looks like a guy. He looks like Trevor Lawrence, like a guy who doesn't know what he's doing with no coaches. It's strange.
By the way, because he threw 2 interceptions early in the the earlier loss. So that game was like these last 2 narrow Rams wins where we spot you 2 turnovers in the beginning, and then we see if we can come back. That failed for the Rams against the Titans. It failed for them against the 49ers. It will fail for them this week if they try to do it again.
Yes.
I think that because all of his interceptions seem to be around the 19-yard line or somewhere along there. And the Rams ranked 29th in deep zone, which is inside their own 20 offense. So when they're pinned back there, those mistakes have killed them. Problem is, and I know it's much more random on the defensive side of the ball, 49ers are 30th in deep zone defense. So it's
interesting.
Yeah. That might be like a handful of plays, et cetera, et cetera. It's much more organized, but they're not necessarily built to take advantage of the main thing that the Rams do.
Well, when you're in the deep zone, when you're inside your own 20, you often shoot for the big play.
Yeah.
And the Niners defensive specialty this year has been the deep downfield DPI.
Right.
That's Stafford could win this game without completing a lot of passes. Just get those yellow flags out there.
Beat reporter says CCX3. Beat reporter handicapped Jimmy G playing at 68%, but also acknowledged the mind games of it. That is a very oddly specific percentage.
It's like 2 out of 3, but it's a little bit more.
Like not 2/3.
No.
I love it. The precision.
We need to get that beat reporter on here. What's his formula?
I will point out the Rams are on top of all of ESPN's trench measures.
Okay.
They have Aaron Donald.
The San Francisco is also in the top 10, except for in run block win rate. So this is a really strong trench matchup. Trent Williams has been phenomenal at left tackle for the 49ers this year, but the right side of their line is iffy.
Right.
And of course, Nick Bosa has been really good this year on defense for San Francisco.
Yes.
So this is a really strong matchup right here.
Right. And the Niners can be a little like the Titans, where it's like, oh, who was healthy that week? Oh, that's the strong version. So when you try to go through their overall stats, you're like, oh, that was the week these guys, Kittle was out for those weeks, et cetera. And you get a different read on them.
The line on this game is Rams by 4.5. And I actually made this the Football Outsiders pick of the week. San Francisco plus 4.5.
I'm going. Okay. I'm with you.
It's tempting. I mentioned bonehead interceptions, and we're talking about Matthew Stafford. I feel the need to point out the opposite quarterback in this game is maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, who has his own track record of hey, where did that linebacker come from?
Or a rookie.
Balls.
Right.
I'm writing about the Rams for next year's almanac, so I've watched almost all their games, and at their best, they're better than San Francisco has been. And even
I think that's true.
Even in their past 2 games, most of their team has played well. It's the 3 or 4 terrible turnovers over that stretch that have killed them. And so I'm just gonna and these seeding is not as important as getting into the playoffs, obviously. But the Rams do still have something to play for. Try to get that number 2 pick, and then maybe somebody beats Green Bay, they could host the NFC title game. So I'm going to stick with the Rams.
I mean, they're still playing for the division, right? Like if they lose and Arizona beats Seattle, they have to go on the road in the wild card round. So they definitely still have something to play for.
Yes.
Even better then. Okay, then yes, I will take the Rams and I will lay the points in that one.
The last game of the year, which I believe the NFL is trying to turn #Game272 into a thing, is the Los Angeles Chargers at the Las Vegas Raiders. Previous game was Chargers 28, Raiders 14, even though, as we all know, the Raiders playing in Los Angeles is actually a home game for them.
Mm-hmm.
So DVOA thinks
we lost you.
DVOA thinks the Chargers are much better than the Raiders.
Yes.
And both teams are better passing than rushing, but the Vegas defense is strong against the run, and the Chargers defense is terrible against the run. So that would suggest the Raiders may want to run a little bit more and the Chargers pass a little bit more. And between like Josh Jacobs is going to take advantage of defensive weakness and Justin Herbert is going to take advantage of defensive weakness, I will go with the latter.
By the way, if a Raiders playing in LA, that's a home game for the Raiders. Is the Chargers playing in Vegas a home game for the Cowboys? Sorry.
Touche.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Yeah, I was looking at some numbers last night, and Seattle has scored more points than the Raiders. They have allowed fewer points than the Raiders. The Raiders are in a win-in situation, and Seattle has been practically eliminated for a month now. So life is not always fair. And the Chargers are better. They should win. Justin Herbert is a rock star. Derek Carr is a probably better than his reputation starter. He's a starting quarterback in the NFL.
And I mean no disrespect to the Raiders and the Raider fans, but the national fandom, let's be honest, who do we want to see in the playoffs have to face Buffalo or Kansas City? The Chargers or the Raiders?
Yes. Yeah, it's
you want to see the Chargers.
Right.
You want to see Justin Herbert in a quarterback in a shootout duel with Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. It sounds awesome. I just said it out loud. I'm like, ooh, that sounds fun.
Yes.
And it's probably going to happen because the Raiders are not very good. They've won some close games. They've kind of flown under the radar. There's a part of me that because of all the terrible things that have happened around that program involving people who are not there anymore, it would be a great story if the guys who are there rallied and got in this postseason. And you know the terrible things that have happened are not the fault of anyone who will be playing or coaching in this game. Sure. You don't have to feel guilty cheering for the Raiders in this one. So that it would be a great story, but great stories don't always come true.
And they're not always fun to watch.
Yeah, they're not phenomenal games. And the possibility of hearing, Tony Romo or somebody babbling through the John Gruden situation. Like, no, I don't necessarily need that.
Well, that's also fair too. Yeah,
part of the story. By the way, in the injury reports, very encouraging on the Chargers end of things. James came back last week. Derwin James, he was out for a while. He was part of the reason they were struggling. Eckler, another reason they were struggling. He came back last week. Chargers look relatively healthy, more or less, right now. So
Chiefs Chargers 3 would be awesome.
Yes.
Both of these defenses are better against passes in the middle of the field than on the sidelines, and the Chargers are near the bottom of the league in how often they pass in the middle of the field. They mostly pass to the sidelines, where the Raiders have a weakness.
Yeah, they pass the sidelines where they have the quarterback's arm can get passes there easy, and the guys can get the receivers can get deep. They've got a quarterback with a big arm surrounding him with a lot of talented, fast wide receivers, and it has put them on the verge of the playoffs. What a concept.
I will point out the Chargers are very weak against wide receiver ones, which I guess would be Hunter Renfrow.
Yes.
And they're 27th against tight ends. I don't know if Darren Waller is going to finally be healthy enough to play in this game, but he could have a big game against them.
I believe he returned to practice yesterday.
But again, like you said, James is healthy. So James, James would be covering Waller. So I'm sure that if I went and broke it down, how the Chargers do against tight ends depends a lot on, we know that Kelsey went nuts on them after James went out of the game.
Right.
CCX3 points out, I think this is why the Chargers don't throw in the middle of the field a lot, or one of the reasons they don't. It's because Jared Cook has been awful.
Yes.
Also, they have a quarterback who can throw out routes all the time and throw on the sidelines all the time. I mean, one of the reasons they throw less in the middle of the field than a San Francisco is because of who their quarterback is and what his strengths are. So,
right. Cook is Cook. Cook will catch a ball and fumble, or tip drill to somebody.
Yeah.
Chargers by 3.
Yeah.
Pretty
confident
in that one. Yeah, I would take LA pretty quickly.
Sounds like a bargain.
Yeah, I mean, it's in Vegas, right? So if you believe in home field advantage still.
Right.
And Timo Risky from PFF had an interesting post on Twitter suggesting that home field advantage has existed this year.
Okay.
It's just been about half of what it usually is.
Okay.
But I still, even if you believe in that, I would still go with the Chargers to cover.
They've been a pretty clearly better team than the Raiders for most of this year.
Yeah. And I want to root for that anyway. So go Chargers, go. And hopefully I think that if everything goes we know that not every favorite will win, but I believe that if every favorite wins, we end up with Chargers, Chiefs 3, Bills, Colts, and Bengals. If every favorite wins including Cleveland over Cincinnati, we would have Bills, Colts, and Patriots, Bengals.
That'd be a lot of fun. That's a great AFC playoff slate.
That's a great AFC playoffs.
Yeah.
The NFL has almost gotten to the point. It's almost like basketball. You don't need to pay attention until the playoffs start. And now that we're here, it could be a fun playoffs.
And that's what I'm worried about. I lamented in the New York Times a little bit about it. All during the season when we'd have these Bengals Chargers games, this is a playoff preview. This is a playoff preview. When there's 4 of them a week, and then they won, so they got separation. They lost next week, and everybody's still 9-8 at the end. It is like the NBA. It's like the NHL. It's okay, these guys are guaranteed to go in, and they're just sort of jockeying during the season. Call me in January.
As I said yesterday, although it would be wonderful if the Chargers are the 7th seed to have Kansas City versus the Chargers overall, I said on the show yesterday, I think that the 7 playoff teams is much worse for the sport than the 17th game.
I agree.
Yes.
And I know we're going to 18 games soon.
Yes.
So break out your USFL records, baby. Within a couple years, they're going
to be
back. 18 games.
Yeah, break out your USFL this year.
I have no idea
why.
Yeah,
USFL next spring on NBC and Fox.
I can't wait to watch a USFL game where Tavon Austin and Laquell Treadwell are the number 1 and number 2 receivers for a team.
And we'll be like, these used to be the Jaguars. This is what Trevor Lawrence had to work with when he was a rookie.
It will be like when the Baltimore Stars became the Saints, pretty much in the NFL, and they followed Mora. They'll get Meyer to coach in the USFL, and he'll bring Tavon with him and Tebow with him. It'll be great.
Yeah.
Oh, don't give them ideas, Mike. Oh, don't do that.
No more Tebow, please. No more Tebow. All right, folks. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you. We're on 1:00 Eastern almost every weekday. No longer on Tuesdays, but we will. Tomorrow, Scott Spratt will be here at 1:00 to set you up to play Week 18 DFS, also known as Who Cares? Not who cares as in who cares about Week 18, but who cares about as in which players care and which players should we pick up for DFS based on the idea that they actually care about the games this week. That's what I mean by who cares. Thank you to Parker Fleming for previewing Georgia, Alabama with us. Thank you, Vince, for joining us. Thanks, as always, to Mike. Again, we want to thank everybody who has watched the show and asked questions online and everybody who's listened all year long. This is my last show of the regular season. Obviously, Scott Spratt will be here tomorrow, but it's been a lot of fun doing these broadcasts, doing them as podcasts afterwards on the FO Podcast Network. Please make sure, if you haven't yet, to subscribe to us on your app of choice so you are hearing us all through the playoffs. We're going to have lots of playoff preview information. I will be back on Monday to review Week 18 with Ian O'Connor. Otherwise, everybody enjoy Week 18, and I will talk to you next week. So long, everybody.